15 million people spit into a tube and mailed their DNA to a company in Mountain View, California. Their genetic code, their ancestry, their predispositions to cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, the most personal data a human being can produce. That company was once worth $6 billion. Today, it's bankrupt, and all of that DNA. It was sold to a pharmaceutical corporation at auction for 4 cents on the dollar. This is how 23andMe went from the most exciting startup in biotech to the biggest cautionary tale in Silicon Valley. 32-year-old Wall Street healthcare analyst named Anne Wojcicki had a problem with medicine. She'd spent a decade watching the healthcare industry from the inside, investing in pharmaceutical companies, studying clinical trials, sitting through earnings calls. And what she kept seeing frustrated her. The entire system was designed to profit from treating sick people, not from keeping them healthy. Wojcicki believed genetic information could flip that equation. If ordinary people could see their own DNA, their risks, their predispositions, their ancestry, they could make better decisions before they ever got sick. Preventive medicine powered by personal data. It was a radical idea, and she had the perfect connections to make it happen. She co-founded 23andMe with Linda Avey and Paul Kusensa, naming the company after the 23 pairs of chromosomes in human DNA. They set up shop in Mountain View, California. And here's a detail that matters. Wojcicki was married to Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google. In 2007, Google invested $3.9 million in the startup. It wasn't just capital, it was a signal. Silicon Valley's most powerful company was betting that personal genomics was the future. The first product launched in November 2007. For $999, anyone could order a saliva collection kit, spit into a tube, mail it back, and receive a detailed breakdown of their genetic makeup, ancestry composition, health risk reports, carrier status for dozens of diseases. It was like opening the hood on your own biology. In 2008, Time magazine named it the invention of the year. And that recognition wasn't just about the technology. It was about what the technology represented. The Human Genome Project had cost $3 billion and taken 13 years when it completed in 2003. 5 years later, 23andMe was offering a consumer version for under $1,000. Then they made the move that changed everything. They dropped the price, first to $299, then to $99. Suddenly, genetic testing wasn't a luxury for Silicon Valley early adopters. It was a mainstream product, a gift you bought your parents for Christmas, a curiosity purchase on Black Friday. Spit parties became a real phenomenon, groups of friends ordering kits together and comparing their ancestry results over drinks. Ancestry DNA entered the market, and the two companies began a ferocious land grab for customers. Prices fell even further. The marketing shifted from science to storytelling. Find out where you really come from. The commercials showed people weeping as they discovered unexpected heritage. It was brilliant, emotional, and it worked. Here's what the growth looked like. 1 million customers by 2015, 2 million by 2017, 5 million by 2018, 10 million by 2019. The curve was almost vertical. 23andMe was everywhere, on morning talk shows, in holiday gift guides, in college biology classes. People who had never thought about genetics were suddenly debating their Neanderthal DNA percentage at Thanksgiving dinner. It felt like one of those rare products that fundamentally changes what normal people know about themselves. By 2018, more than 5 million people had taken the 23andMe test. Ancestry DNA had even more. But here's the part most people missed. The real product was never the plastic tube or the ancestry pie chart. It was the data. Every single person who spit into that tube was contributing to one of the largest genetic databases ever assembled on Earth. And that database had enormous value for one industry in particular, pharmaceutical companies. drug development is staggeringly expensive. A single new drug costs an average of $2.6 billion to bring to market, and 90% of candidates fail in clinical trials. But what if you could use genetic data from millions of real people to identify which drug targets were most likely to work? What if you could find patients with specific genetic markers for clinical trials in days instead of months? That was the pitch. And in 2018, GlaxoSmithKline, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, bought it. GSK invested $300 million in 23andMe, not for the consumer product, for access to the genetic data. The 4-year exclusive partnership would use that database to identify drug targets, recruit clinical trial participants, and develop new treatments. Meanwhile, Wojcicki and Sergey Brin had divorced in 2015, severing the personal connection to Google that had given the company its earliest credibility. But the GSK money replaced it with something bigger: legitimacy as a biotech platform. 23andMe was no longer just a consumer genetics company. It was a data company with a pharmaceutical revenue stream. And in 2021, it went public. Not through a traditional IPO with roadshows and underwriter scrutiny, but through a merger with a SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company run by Richard Branson. A SPAC is essentially a blank check company that takes a private company public without the usual due diligence. It was the hot financial vehicle of the easy money era, and 23andMe rode the wave. The stock peaked at around $17.65 per share. The market capitalization hit $6 billion. Anne Wojcicki was a billionaire on paper. The future of personalized medicine seemed inevitable, but underneath the valuation, 4 cracks were already forming, and each one would prove fatal. The first crack appeared years before the company went public, and it revealed something dangerous about the culture. In November 2013, the FDA sent Anne Wojcicki a warning letter that landed like a bomb. The agency ordered 23andMe to immediately stop marketing its health reports to consumers. The reason was damning. After more than 5 years of selling health-related genetic tests directly to people, 23andMe still hadn't provided the FDA with evidence that its tests were actually accurate. Think about that. A company was telling millions of people whether they were at elevated risk for breast cancer or Alzheimer's disease, and the federal regulator responsible for medical devices couldn't confirm the results were reliable. The warning letter didn't just scold the company, it exposed a pattern of arrogance. The FDA noted that 23andMe had not completed some of the studies and had not even started other studies necessary for regulatory approval. For 5 years, the company had been playing chicken with the federal government, betting that the rules didn't apply to them. The Silicon Valley playbook of move fast and break things had collided with the reality that you cannot move fast and break people's health decisions. 23andMe complied. Health reports were stripped from the product entirely. For nearly 2 years, customers could only access ancestry data and raw genetic information with no interpretation. The company eventually regained FDA authorization for health reports one by one, but the episode revealed something fundamental: a leadership culture that treated regulatory oversight as an obstacle to be routed around, not a standard to be met. The second crack was structural, and it was a quiet killer. Here's the fundamental problem with selling DNA tests. You only need to take one. Your genome doesn't change, unlike Netflix, which needs you streaming every month, or Amazon, which wants you ordering every week. 23andMe's core product had a customer lifetime value of exactly one purchase. The ceiling was built into the biology. For years, this didn't matter because the market was growing. New customers kept coming. But every market saturates eventually, and this market was smaller than it looked. Estimates suggested that only about 30 to 40 million Americans were ever interested in consumer genetic testing. Once you've captured a significant share of a finite audience that never comes back, there's nowhere to go. By the early 2020s, the people who wanted a DNA test had already taken one. The growth curve flattened out almost overnight. 23andMe tried desperately to solve this. They launched subscription health reports. They added pharmacogenomics, which tells you how your body processes certain medications. They built wellness features. None of it generated the kind of recurring revenue that could sustain a $6 billion valuation. In fiscal 2024, the company reported a $680 million operating loss on just $220 million in revenue. They were burning $3 for every dollar they earned. The third crack was the partnership that propped everything up until it didn't. In August 2023, the exclusive research partnership with GSK expired. This was the deal that had brought in $300 million, validated the entire data as pharma asset thesis, and made 23andMe look like a serious biotech player. When it ended, the revenue stream dried up and the credibility went with it. 71 employees in the therapeutics division were laid off immediately, and then came the crack that broke everything open. On October 6th, 2023, 23andMe disclosed a massive data breach. Hackers had used a technique called credential stuffing, which means trying passwords stolen from other websites to access approximately 14,000 individual accounts. But here's what turned a bad breach into a catastrophic one. 23andMe had a feature called DNA relatives that automatically connected users to their genetic matches. Through that feature, the breach cascaded outward. The personal information of 6.9 million people was exposed, nearly half of all customers. The stolen data included names, birth years, relationship labels, percentage of shared DNA with relatives, ancestry reports, and self-reported locations. For a company whose entire value proposition was trust us with the most personal data you have, this wasn't just a security incident, it was an existential betrayal. The settlement eventually reached $50 million. But the real cost was the one thing you can't buy back: the trust of 15 million people who had handed over their genetic blueprints. What followed was one of the most dramatic collapses in modern corporate history. The stock, which had peaked at $17.65, began a relentless slide. By February 2024, it was trading at about 70 cents. Then it fell below $1, triggering an official warning from NASDAQ: maintain $1 per share or get delisted. The company that was going to revolutionize healthcare was now fighting to stay on the stock exchange. In April 2024, Wojcicki announced her intention to take 23andMe private to buy back the shares she didn't already own. She controlled 49% of the company's voting power through a dual-class share structure, the kind of arrangement that gives founders outsized control even as their ownership stake shrinks. It's the same structure that protects Mark Zuckerberg at Meta. But here's the problem: what protects a visionary founder also shields one who has lost the plot. In September 2024, something almost unprecedented in corporate America happened. All 7 independent members of the board of directors resigned in a single night. In their letter to Wojcicki, they wrote that despite months of discussions, they had yet to see a fully financed, fully diligenced, actionable proposal from the CEO. Every independent check on the founder's power walked out the door at once. 23andMe was now a company run by its founder with no independent board oversight, a stock price in free fall, a customer base that had been told their DNA was compromised, and no path to profitability. In October, the company executed a reverse stock split, a financial maneuver that artificially raises the share price by reducing the number of outstanding shares. It bought them a few months on NASDAQ. It changed nothing about the business. In November 2024, 23andMe cut 40% of its remaining workforce, about 200 people, and shut down its entire therapeutics division. The drug development program that was supposed to justify the valuation, the GSK partnership, the whole data as pharma asset thesis. Dead. 5 months later, on March 24th, 2025, 23andMe filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company that had once been valued at $6 billion listed $220 million in revenue and $680 million in operating losses for its final full fiscal year. It was bleeding money at a pace that made survival mathematically impossible. Anne Wojcicki resigned as CEO, stating she wanted to be in the best position to pursue the company as an independent bidder. And then came the moment that made headlines around the world: the bankruptcy auction. Regeneron Pharmaceuticals submitted a bid of $256 million. A company once valued at $6 billion was being sold for roughly 4 cents on every dollar of its peak valuation. And the most controversial part, Regeneron was acquiring the genetic database. The DNA of over 15 million people was changing hands. The California Attorney General issued a public advisory urging 23andMe customers to delete their data and request the destruction of their stored genetic samples. Think about that. A state's top law enforcement official was telling citizens, get your DNA out of there before someone else owns it. So, what killed 23andMe? 3 structural flaws that any business can learn from. The first is the one-time purchase trap. If your customer only needs your product once, you are on a ticking clock from the moment you launch. 23andMe had one of the most compelling consumer products of its generation. But compelling and sustainable are not the same thing. They never built a second act that customers needed to come back for. Subscriptions, wellness reports, pharmacy features, none of it stuck. The lesson is uncomfortable but true. A great product with no repeat purchase cycle is a project, not a business. The second is the paradox of data. For a decade, 23andMe positioned its genetic database as its greatest competitive advantage. The pitch to investors, to GSK, to the stock market was simple. We have the data, and data is the new oil. But when that data was breached in 2023, it became the new toxic waste. The very asset that made the company valuable made the company dangerous. And when the company went bankrupt and that data was sold at auction to a pharma company, it confirmed every fear privacy advocates had been raising for years. If your product depends on people trusting you with sensitive information, a single breach doesn't just cost money, it collapses the entire value proposition. The third is the danger of unchecked founder control. Dual-class share structures exist to protect founders from the short-term pressure of Wall Street. In the right hands, they let a visionary build something extraordinary without quarterly earnings, calls dictating strategy. But in the wrong hands, they become a bunker. Anne Wojcicki controlled 49% of the voting power with a fraction of the equity. When every independent director resigned, when the stock hit penny territory, when the data breach eroded customer trust, there was no mechanism to force a course change. The same structure designed to protect a founder's vision can also prevent a company from being saved. And underneath all 3 of those failures sits the SPAC bubble. 23andMe went public through a blank check merger at the peak of the easiest money era in modern finance. The scrutiny that comes with a traditional IPO, the roadshows, the underwriter due diligence, the hard questions about unit economics and paths to profitability, all of it was skipped. When the tide of free money went out, 23andMe was standing there with no swimsuit. If you watched our first video on Toys R Us, you saw what happens when a beloved brand fails to adapt to a changing market. 23andMe is the mirror image. This wasn't a company that failed to innovate. It was a company that innovated brilliantly and then had nothing to sell you next. They changed the world with a single product and then discovered that a single product isn't enough to survive in it. Next time on Business Autopsy, we're examining another company that convinced an entire generation it had reinvented the rules of its industry until reality came calling. Make sure you don't miss it.